Hello, and welcome to the Brave New Weed Podcast. And now, here's your host, Joe Dolce.
Welcome to another episode of the Brave New Weed Podcast, folks. We're going to start this episode. I'm here with Matthew.
Hi, Joe.
We're going to start this episode with a half a dropper of a tincture I brought back from California a couple of weeks ago. This is called Granny Jane's Cannabis Tonics. And if any of you listened to the last episode we did, the interview with Mitch Thompson, you will know that he is the maker of these tonics. And this one's called Disco Fiesta Tonic. It has cannabis sativa, yerba mate, skullcap, cacao, and blood orange. What do you think of the taste, Matthew?
It's actually great. I've dealt with some like alcohol-based tinctures before, and they can be a little burny, and they always just kind of taste like rubbing alcohol or smell like rubbing alcohol. This actually tastes kind of nice. It's got this rich orange flavor. The blood orange really cuts through.
They do tend to burn the mouth a little. The thing about what's interesting is Mitcho's garden is where he grows all of these herbs. So you go through this garden, and
all natural, all organic.
It's completely out. And then he I want to say marinate. That's the wrong word. Infuses something called grape alcohol with them, so it really captures the flavor.
Yeah.
And
that's sort of the like grappa-y kind of.
It's a little like grappa with blood orange and a little cannabinoid. So let's see if we get through this episode. Let's see how we do on this.
Yeah,
okay?
that'll be the good measure.
My favorite news item this week comes from the state of Utah, one of the most beautiful states in the country, I think. And it was a really fascinating report because the Church of Mormon bans alcohol, tobacco, caffeine.
Right.
And yet
the body is a temple.
The body is a temple, and yet all across the state, because they're looking for medical cannabis now, they're looking to
they will actually
on
Proposition 2 on the ballot this coming November. I believe that the early statistics are like 60%, 66%.
I think it's a good idea.
Want to go ahead and this is only medical. We're not talking about recreational here.
But the billboards that are going up are really interesting. They're quoting the Book of Mormon, saying things like, "All wholesome herbs God hath ordained for the use of man. Vote yes on Proposition 2. So isn't that interesting? The Book of Mormon says, all wholesome herbs. The Church of Mormon, the Mormon Church says no.
Sure. I mean, I think you could debate the use term of wholesome herbs. Whether or not,
what's a more wholesome herb than cannabis?
And it was probably also true. I think there's quite a lot of stuff in the Bible as well.
Yes, cannabusim was this thing they used to burn in the temples.
Right, yeah.
And it could be translated as a reedy herb, yes, but clearly its use was for anointing and it was for medical use, and people were buried with it all the time.
And even regardless of that specific case, you're talking about something that was put on this earth by the Creator.
That we figured out how to use 10,000 years ago.
Right. And we're actually told that, hey, you have dominion over the beasts of the land and the plants that grow. And it's like, it's for you there, but then we came along later and said, but it makes people...
we have to make this criminal.
It's a weird. We
have to make this
weird interpretation of how to get into all that.
Yeah, it's a long story.
But who's behind this? There's not really.
Well, they won't say who. The people, the billboards have no one's taken ownership of them really. So that's quite interesting. They don't want. I guess they don't want to go against the church that basically rules the entire state.
Well, it would be interesting to try and poke around and see if we can figure out actually where the financial backing behind these billboards might have come from.
I think if we have any listeners who are Mormon or who live in Utah, they should send us a note.
Well, I would love to maybe get both sides of that, too. If you're pro Prop 2 in Utah, or if you are a member of the Mormon Church, please reach out to us, bravenewweedcast@gmail.com.
Tell us.
We'd
love to talk to you. Yeah,
let's give you a platform.
We don't get many Mormons on this show. I don't know why we've been neglecting Mormons.
I don't think we've been neglecting Mormons. I just don't think that they're as vocal in this space as we are.
Let's change that. What else? What other news is happening?
Well, a great piece of news that I read just actually the other night was that a high court in Seattle, judges in Seattle, Washington, have agreed to completely clear past misdemeanor convictions for pot possession that were prosecuted before marijuana was legalized in Washington state.
It's the only right thing to do.
I agree with you. This was just caught my attention because I don't know that I had seen anything firm about this. I know that Massachusetts was looking into, cleaning
California,
off
I
records.
believe California has done it.
California's
as well.
taken some
Yeah.
action. I believe that our friend a few episodes back was getting his
Dennis.
Dennis was getting his conviction.
The owner of Cannacraft.
Sort of undone, or at least the travel ban undone.
Yeah, it's not fair that someone who was arrested for a very low-level crime is never allowed to work in the industry again.
I agree.
So-
and also the other parts of that for people who, this is dealing specifically with misdemeanors, but the idea of people who have lost the right to vote.
That's
because
terrible.
of cannabis possession over a certain amount or something
Yeah,
like
this
that,
restitution-
especially people of color.
This is restitution that needs to happen.
Well, and it was something like even Cynthia Nixon, whom, even though she didn't win in the New York state governor's race, that was one of the first things she said was that we need to deal with criminal prosecutions and getting those off people's records.
We all agree. What else is news?
A nice pat on our own back.
I'll pat my back.
Yeah, women.com, which a notable, publication for women in the United States, put out an article that listed their 6 must-listen to cannabis podcasts. And would you like to take a guess at who clocked in at number 4?
Number 4 is better than number 5.
Absolutely.
I'm
Well,
very, very honored to be honored by women. Yeah, I'm very interested.
yeah, they did.
Very-
They named the Brave New Weed podcast as their number 4 must-listen to podcast. We're keeping some great company over on their website.
Who else do they name?
The Cannabis Podcast from the Denver Post.
Sure.
San Francisco Chronicles The Hash.
Nice.
Both of which ranked below us, by the way. And sort of a funny addition and a podcast that I regularly listen to, which is Getting Doug with High. A very funny podcast featuring Doug Benson, comedian Doug Benson, and
He's funny.
pro-cannabis
and
advocate.
he's funny.
Which, by the way, Doug, hit us up, buddy. Come on our podcast, or
Yeah, why
let's
don't we have
exchange guest spots. Yeah,
Let's talk to Doug. Exactly. Doug, come on. Send us a note. Let's do that. And the other bit of news is that you, my friend, are saying Auf Wiedersehen for a little while, huh?
That is correct. I am making a big life change and move, and I'm relocating. My wife and I are relocating from New York City to Leipzig, Germany. Which
Leipzig,
is
not Berlin.
It's close to Berlin. It's sort of the whole like Stanford, Connecticut to New York City type situation, to where Leipzig is, if you're on a commuter chain, it's about an hour outside of Berlin, Germany.
And you're going to join us on the podcast every week.
Absolutely. I'm still 100% committed to you, to the show, to all of our listeners, so that we're going to continue to work and bring you the best coverage of cannabis-related topics, all the cannabis news, in-depth conversations with creative people in the space. I definitely don't want to see that come to a close, and we're going to do everything we can to keep it going.
Let's see what kind of cannabists we can find in Berlin. Sehr gut.
Sehr good indeed.
Yeah.
Hi, listeners. We are always on the lookout for great things to talk about on the Brave New Weed podcast, and we'd love to hear from you. You can always email us at bravenewweedcast@gmail.com with links to articles, interesting news stories, personal accounts of things that you've done, or leads on books or products that we should know about. You can always contact us at bravenewweedcast@gmail.com.
So our guest this week is Dr. Stacy Kerr, who's been a family physician for her entire career, and stopped practicing several years ago just because she got burnt out on the bureaucracy of being a doctor. But Stacy's really interesting. She's worked a lot with pregnant women and has some very interesting points of view on pregnancy and use of cannabis. But moreover, she and I talk a lot about this thing that's called cannabis use disorder. And it's very interesting because, because of prohibition, advocates really have, I think, sort of pulled the wool over it. They've sort of said, there really is no such thing as cannabis use disorder, but
Or cannabis addiction, maybe.
I think maybe they're right that there is no such thing as real cannabis addiction, but we've all seen people who have spent way too much time smoking and being wrecked, and there's a vacancy in the eyes, and there's like a little bit of a beat behind the conversation, and sometimes when they open their mouths, they just talk for a very long time, whether somebody's listening or not, whether somebody's standing in front of them or whether they're talking to a wall. I think we've all sort of had that experience, right? So Stacy's got some really interesting perspective on that, and we are going to work a lot in this interview about talking about what is cannabis use disorder, how do you get to it, and how do you identify it? Are you interested in that?
I am indeed, and obviously the first thing that comes to my mind is
do you have
if
it?
I have it. But I mean, I don't think so. But I definitely understand the concept of not necessarily an addiction to a physical substance, but this idea of prioritizing use, to where if it's the first thing on your mind when you wake up, or when you leave work, you're not functioning properly in society, or at your job, or in your relationship, because you're preoccupied with this idea of man, I wish I could just get high right now. And at that point, I definitely could see how it could develop into major problems.
Well, let's talk to Stacy and see what she has to say. Dr. Stacy Kerr, thank you for joining us from Santa Rosa, California.
Yeah, pleasure to be here, Joe.
I want to jump right into the topic of pregnancy and cannabis, okay? Because this is a topic that when I write about it or when I talk about it, a lot of people, it really arouses an awful lot of emotions, okay? I think, well, let's start with what,
Yep.
I mean, my research has always told me that there's no conclusive evidence that cannabis is a harmful thing to use while pregnant. Now, it's not going to harm the child, the baby, and it doesn't harm the mom. As a matter of fact, it has some salubrious effects, especially if the mom is feeling nauseated or tense in the pregnancy. What, am I wrong? What does the research tell us? What do we know about this currently?
Well, we know that we don't know a definitive answer, and that is colored by opinions on both extremes, those that say no problem and those that say, oh, you're going to kill your baby this way or make it into someone he could have been better.
Yes.
So I am a family physician who delivered babies. Obstetrics was part of my practice, delivered hundreds of babies. And I also had my children in the 70s, and therefore me and all my friends, we had a bunch of babies back in the day that were, a lot of them exposed to cannabis. So that's a grassroots sample to take a look at, because those kids are now in their 40s,
Yep.
and we can see how they're doing in general. But with the question about during pregnancy, the problem is that everyone knows that the crosses what we call the blood-brain barrier.
Yes.
Goes into the brain and binds to receptors in the brain. And when people think about something from outside the human body coming in and going into brains, they start getting worried and saying it's going to wreak havoc. And that's where a lot of the fear about using cannabis in pregnancy comes from. Just the fact that it does go in there and bind to receptors.
Yes. I mean, I can see that. We don't want to mess with developing creatures. We want to keep them pure and healthy and pure, I guess is the word,
That's
right?
right.
Yep.
There's some there's interesting information. One of the first things that caught my eye was some work done by Esther Frieda, who worked in Meshulam's lab in Israel.
Yes.
She looked at cannabinoids and how they are necessary for reproduction and survival in the first 24 hours.
Yes, how they cause
And
a child
she
to
did this
suckle,
work
right?
on mice.
Mm-hmm.
That's right. If these mice, baby mice, did not have any cannabinoid receptors, they died within 24 hours. And those same babies, if they were given THC, survived to suckle another day and grew up to be fine little mice.
What does that tell you?
Saying that humans are not. I'm saying that the endocannabinoid system is essential to life. And the question arises on if we manipulate that with phytocannabinoids, the kind that come from plants, Are we harming or are we enhancing? And we do not have the answer to that definitively yet. We do have some clues.
What clues do you see?
Well, one is that we're not, a lot of studies come out and say it shows poor executive functioning when those kids get older. And everybody goes, oh my gosh, you smoke pot when you're pregnant and your kid's going to be stupid when he's 14. However, one of the things that I enjoy doing is I enjoy getting a hold of the actual scientific articles and reading them for how well they were done, how well they accounted for other variables. And when I started doing that, I started seeing the bias that exists in our society about this medicine bleeding into the scientific articles. And you can tell when you start reading an article if the author of the article or the funder of the article already had an opinion about the medicine. So many of the scientific articles that we are quoting and holding up at public health meetings are poorly done. They, number one, do not account for other substances that people are using, such as alcohol and tobacco and cocaine and speed, and I could go on and on.
Yes.
So you can't really isolate the effects of cannabis if that's how you're doing your study. Another problem, I think this is a big one, is somebody truly wants to study the effects of cannabis, say. So how are they going to do that? They want to do it on humans. So a big study done in Australia that's quoted by many, many doctors sat everybody down at their very first prenatal visit at a public health clinic. And the person behind the computer doing the intake, one of the questions was, do you use any illicit drugs? Now imagine that you are a young woman, vulnerably, newly pregnant, coming in hoping to get good care, and you're asked a loaded question like that.
Yeah.
What percentage of those women are going to answer truthfully, yes, I smoke marijuana? So you're getting a skew right there. You might, how about we just test everybody's pee when they come in? Everybody gives a urine sample when they go in for a pregnancy check. Let's just do a pee test. Well, surprisingly, that doesn't really give you good answers either, because if someone's only using cannabis occasionally and say they used some a week ago, but not for a week, well, they could test negative on that pee test, but that doesn't mean that cannabis wasn't on board and affecting her baby a week ago or tomorrow. So we have a problem with selection of individuals. But when you look across the board at all the data, the only thing we've been able to say for sure, is that babies exposed to cannabis appear to be smaller when they're born. Not that much smaller, but slightly. Not so small that they don't thrive.
Yes.
Not so small that they have to have special care.
Yes.
But a little bit smaller. And I'll tell you, Joe, as a woman who's delivered many, many babies and had two myself, if I could have a slow but very healthy baby to push out, I would be grateful. Thank you very much.
I'm pretty sure that you're the second guest on our show to echo exactly that same sentiment.
Yes, of course. Of course.
And I'm not saying go smoke pot while you're pregnant to make sure your baby doesn't get too big.
I understand.
I'm just saying that's the only thing we found, and we aren't really seeing any good evidence for long-term detrimental effects to cannabis.
Well, Melanie Dreyer did interesting work in the 90s. She went to Jamaica and studied Jamaican women who were taking tea every day, cannabis tea, to help with nausea, just to keep them relaxed in a poor and difficult place. And her results were that the kids were very good students, in fact, better than the sample, better than the control group, and were more socialized, more sociable, more earlier. God, I don't sound very sociable today.
That's true.
Forgive me. What do you think of that work? That was an ethnographic study. Yeah.
I love Melanie Dreyer's work. In the 90s, the cannabis was not the same as it is today. We have to
Correct.
realize that. THC levels were lower. The people in Jamaica who were using cannabis with her study were actually of a higher socioeconomic status than others. In Jamaica, it's flipped somewhat, at least who admits to using it. So that may have had an effect on her result. In addition, it was a small sample.
Yes.
Not very many. So while I would like to use Melanie's work and hold it up and say CCC, I'm hesitant to do that because of those reasons.
So if a woman comes to you...
However...
Yes, okay. However...
Yeah, go ahead.
No, go however.
Well, no. However, big studies done later with thousands and thousands of individuals still aren't coming up with definitive problems with it. So Melanie's work is still holding up, even though her study is not the strongest that we could use.
So I think...
Put up there.
So for people who are absolutely dead opposed to using it during pregnancy, you would say, don't use it. No big deal. For those who are feeling nauseous or having, I don't know, whatever difficulties one might have while pregnant that cannabis could be used for, what do you say? Would you advise use it, use a little bit, take this, take a tincture, only smoke it, never smoke it? What would you advise, Dr. Kerr?
I love having this conversation because just starting the conversation is fun because patients are so thrilled when a doctor is willing to talk about this with them.
Why? Is it hard? Is it a hard
judgment.
topic? Is it a hard topic for women to talk about this with their doctors?
It's hard for doctors to talk about it. They don't know anything about many of them don't know anything about it. They're afraid of it. And it's illegal in many states, so they don't even want to bring it up because they feel like it puts them at risk. And
Yes.
if they do know something about it, they are often afraid of being accused of being a stoner doc themselves. Like, hey, doc, you know so much. Did you smoke weed during lunch or something? It's just this whole social stigma. So it's hard for doctors to talk about it. But I live in Northern California, and I know that it is everywhere here, and I'm not afraid of it. And I like to talk about it with my patients. So I do. And they say, well, yeah, I smoke a little weed with my husband. And I go, well, why? And that often stops them because it's a lifestyle issue for many people. And I want to know why. I want to know if they have a good reason for doing it or if they're just mindlessly imbibing because they're used to doing it. And if you're pregnant, I think you need to think about these kinds. So moving on, say they have a really good reason. They say, well, because I have 2 other kids, I didn't expect to get pregnant again. I work really hard all day, and then I have to take care of these kids. And I'm so stressed out that if I can sit down and use a little cannabis, it just makes it all possible for me. And I go, well, that's a good reason. If you think about it and it works for you, then I move on to how are you using it? And you alluded to this. Are you smoking it? Are you tincturing? Are you eating it? And I'm not much into smoking these days because I'm talking patients. For a few reasons. Smoking is hard on the lungs. It does cause some bronchitis, inflammation of the airways. But you also lose a lot of the beneficial parts of cannabis when you put it in a pipe or a joint and smoke it. The side stream smoke takes away a lot of the terpenes, some of the cannabinoids. You're not getting your full benefit. And there are others to use the medicine that actually are healthier for you and give you more of the medicinal content, like a good vaporize or a tincture.
Yeah.
Or a titrated, well-tested edible so you know what you're getting and you know what you need. So I have that conversation with them on method of administration. And then we talk about microdosing. Do you use just enough to be effective? Are you aware of that? Are you paying attention to that? And is it really enhancing your well-being? And that moves us right into evaluating for a cannabis use disorder. But it's a conversation. It's not a black and white answer. And just the conversation has benefits in that it opens up the topic, the person feels free to speak to it, and it increases trust. And that trust is going to come in handy in a few months when I'm there trying to help her have a baby.
This is a great conversation, and I want to move right to this idea of cannabis use disorder.
Yeah,
you and I have talked about this, Matthew.
That's a brand new term for me.
Stacy and I have talked about this.
Oh,
We've
it's
discussed
a hot term right now.
It's a hot term, did you say?
It's a hot term right now because, well, it's hot because it's, again, two extremes. You've got on one end people who say, oh, there's no such thing. I mean, anybody who thinks there's such a thing as cannabis use disorder just has never smoked weed. And then on the other extreme, there are people who say any use of cannabis is abuse because it's a dangerous drug. And somewhere between those two lies the truth.
Yes, clearly. I mean, for me, I thought about this a lot when I was writing the book, and it seems to me that, God, I while reporting, there were just certain types I would run into. They were mostly men. B, they were a beat behind in a conversation. Their eyes were a little hollow, and so when they started talking, they just kept talking. To me, it felt like they were just like 10%, 20% off the beat of reality. And I thought if there isn't,
Joe,
come
that's
on,
a real downer thing to say, man.
Yeah. I know, it's like a bummer, but
I know, but that's an obvious one, Joe. Let me give you a situation that may not be quite as obvious, and tell me what you think. Okay.
Yep.
Let's see. How about a 44-year-old married father who smokes cannabis first thing in the morning every single day before he even gets out of bed?
Gosh, I mean, I know athletes who do that. I know a lot of people who do. No, I'm serious.
Before getting out of bed?
Before getting out of bed. I know a former Ross Rabigliotti, former Olympian. I don't know if he does it before he gets out of bed, but he works out every morning at something like 5:30 or 6 o'clock. Yeah. And he likes to take cannabis sugar in his coffee before he gets to the gym.
Working out.
Before working out. And he is a dedicated athlete. I mean, the guy he's got a great body. He's like a great guy. He's a great mind.
That's different than what she's suggesting?
What am I missing? What am I missing there?
That's part of a practical ritual, right? Because he's gotten himself up.
Let me sweeten the pot a little bit.
Okay.
Okay. Let me expand on the situation because that helps. Okay. So let's say this 44-year-old man, he's married, he has a couple kids, smokes a joint in the morning before he does anything else, and then he goes in and he makes breakfast for the kids. And once they're off to school, he takes a break to smoke another. And then he goes off to work in his home office. And he does this pattern all day long, taking smoke breaks during the day. I mean, he might smoke 5 joints over the course of a day. He earns a good living, takes good care of his family. He does his share, housework, childcare, and all that. But let's say he and his wife have not been intimate for 6 years.
Whoa. Okay.
Is that cannabis use disorder?
What happens if he misses a day, I guess, is the question.
Well, the point being in situations like this is that it isn't easy to identify. She's happy that they're not intimate. Maybe that's their agreement. Maybe it's okay. But let's say she asks him to quit for a bit. Take a week or 2 off, John, and he says no. Well, then it moves over closer to cannabis use disorder because he may be putting his cannabis habit over his relationship. But am I the one to judge that? He's functional. They have health insurance. He's not spending all their money or time on getting cannabis. Is that still a use disorder?
I mean,
Is he hiding something?
You replace cannabis in this scenario with a beer, and it's basically like every family sitcom from the 70s and 80s. So,
Yeah.
So wait. So are you saying that there is a term called cannabis use disorder that we've all observed on some level, but that there is really no definition of it? Is that the point here, Stace?
Oh, no heavens. There is a book called the DSM-5. It's
Yes.
the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders.
mhm.
And that is the Bible for psychiatrists. And it's also used, there's diagnoses number that allow physicians to get paid for treating those diagnoses. And that book has an official definition for cannabis use disorder.
How do they define it?
Yeah, can you
And
hit us
it's
with
all
that?
these things that it's I don't know, a dozen different things, but it's a problematic pattern of cannabis use that leads to clinically significant impairment or distress, as manifested by at least 2 of these items on the list occurring within a 12-month period.
Oh, no. I don't want to see
And
the
it's
list.
things like
I'm immediately nervous by this list.
But I probably have. I'm
People don't
sure
wanna
I
hear it,
have like
right?
5 or 6 of them already.
And in the
too.
past 12 months?
How about the past 12 minutes? Go on. Tell us some
I don't know
symptoms. Go on.
I don't know. I'll give you. Cannabis is often taken in larger amounts than was intended.
Okay.
Well, what's
Overdose.
intended?
That's one of them.
Whatever's intended. Yeah.
Persistent desire or unsuccessful efforts to cut down or control cannabis use.
Oh, so this is a self-awareness that maybe I'm using too much.
This is how the
Or-
DSFM or whatever.
Yeah, no, I'm
that's
just
how
trying
they're
to,
defining it.
comprehend it because I'm like, all right, I'm good on this one. We can move past this
Okay,
one.
you can judge yourself if you want.
Check. Okay. A great deal of time is spent in activities necessary to obtain or use or recover from the effects of cannabis.
I think I'm pretty good there.
Craving or a strong desire or urge to use cannabis.
Well,
It's kind of like the last
that sounds
one
like
that they
almost
listed.
everybody
then
I
have
know.
like chocolate chip cookie use disorder because I regularly get cravings for that. That seems a little vague.
Well, you make a really good point. You could, as I share these with you, you could replace the word cannabis with a multitude of other words,
Yeah.
television, games,
Mobile
alcohol.
phones.
I mean, anything. Yeah. So how about recurrent cannabis use results in a failure to fulfill major role obligations at work, school, or home?
Sure, I can get behind that as an indication of a problem. Sure.
Yeah, I think I can do that too. Continued cannabis use despite having persistent or recurrent social or interpersonal problems caused or exacerbated by the effects.
Yeah, that starts to sound like legitimate things
Yeah.
to be concerned about.
Okay. Important occupational or recreational activities are given up or reduced because of cannabis use.
Okay. All right. I mean, look, these seem like they're very
Some of
reasonable
these make sense.
ways of discussing the problem.
Well, I think you make a very, very important point, though, in that in those you could easily substitute mobile phone or television
or sex.
or sex, anything really.
Pretty much any of our human pursuits.
Yep.
Because if you're not going
That's
to
right.
work,
I mean, I'm single, and I feel like I spend an inordinate time of my life going on dates or looking for dates, right? It's just
yeah,
like
and if you're like blowing
I'm
off
sorry,
work
you have
way
engagements-
too much
disorder.
time doing that. Sorry, Stace? What'd you say?
You have date use disorder, and we need to talk about that.
I have dating use disorder. There is no doubt about it.
should probably consult a physician.
So
Who should I consult?
the
Tinder?
point is,
That's Dr.
pretty
Tender.
clear when somebody has an alcohol. It's pretty clear when someone has an alcohol use disorder.
Yeah.
They get in car wrecks. They don't show up to work. They slur their speech when they should be talking clearly.
Yeah.
I mean, it's much clearer with something like that than it is with cannabis, especially in the social environment where people are hiding their use. You really don't know who has used cannabis recently when you're out and about interacting with individuals, because a lot of people function well, if not better, with the use of the herb.
Yes.
Yeah, that's. What about cannabis non-use disorder? That sounds like a problem.
How do you tell?
That goes many places.
But wait, I want to be.
Cannabis non-use disorder could lead to opiate addiction and overdose.
Oh Lord.
Wait, what do you mean? Will you talk about that, please?
It's good data that shows that binding the two, the opiates are more effective and do not need to be increased in dosage as if they were used all by themselves. So it's easier to manage the opiate intake in pain patients,
Yes.
and it's easier to get them off those opiates if you know how to combine the cannabinoids with the opiates.
Yes.
This is a little bit of a random track based off of what you just said, but I have a curiosity for you. And this is there any way or anything that you can speak to about any sort of cannabinoid deficiency in the populace? Like, is there any indication at all that maybe just in general we all need a little bit of an external source for some cannabinoids in our system?
That's a really good question. There's some really good work about endocannabinoid deficiency disorder. And it's, excuse me, there's some good information, things like fibromyalgia and a few diagnoses that Dr. Ethan Russo has written quite a bit of information on this. Migraines, irritable bowel syndrome, these health problems that we have trouble pinning down and actually treating effectively, they're starting to look at those as a deficiency disorder in the endocannabinoid system. And I find that very exciting because these are such frustrating diagnoses for a doctor to try to help a patient with, and to get a handle on that would be wonderful.
Very interesting. It's a really interesting line of research. Yeah. And it's not even really begun. Am I correct, Stace? No one's really looked at this as in a clinical way.
Oh no, we're just beginning on this one. Heck, we haven't even known about the endocannabinoid system within the human body for that long.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure that everybody has a endocannabinoid deficiency syndrome. It's, some people don't need or do well with cannabis, at least the kind that has THC in it.
Yeah.
And they shouldn't do it. And it's pretty clear, those people. They don't like it, they're not drawn to it, and they say no thank you, and they're good to go. I'm not sure everybody needs it, but the beautiful thing about this medicine, to me, one of the beautiful things about it is that it goes for homeostasis within the human body. It's looking to bring things back into a healthy balance place. And anything that helps humans these days do that, I think, is worth looking at and worth investigating. If somebody's already pretty well balanced as far as their physiology goes and their mental health, and they're in a pretty good place, well, maybe they don't add any phytocannabinoids in because their own endocannabinoids are doing just fine without it.
Very interesting indeed. Stacy, I could talk to you for a really long time, but this has been great. This has been a half hour of enlightenment, really, and I hope you'll come back and talk to us some more. I like your perspective. You're really open-minded about this stuff, and you're also very sensible about it. I think there's anybody can use too much of anything, really, and we're really not talking about it yet. I think it's the aftermath of prohibition. We're still in the cloud of prohibition, and I think for people who are in the know and people who are using and people who know what they're doing, it's a really important topic to be discussed. It's the breath of fresh air that we need, really. So it's
true, and anything that helps us cope with the challenges of life it can go from being an ally to being a crutch, and it has the potential of becoming a problem in and of itself. But many of us find that cannabis is an ally, and we need to be aware that it can go the whole gamut, and we can't be judging everybody.
Agreed.
That's real good.
Thank you so much. That's a great. Well, I'll take your opinion. From ally to crutch to enemy. I guess it could be all three things, but it seems to be an ally for an awful lot of people. So,
Doctor, before we let you go, if there's anyone out here who would like to reach out and contact you or communicate with you, is there a good website or location or some way that they could reach you if they had additional questions?
I'm a medical consultant for Hawaiian Ethos. It's one of the new dispensaries on the Big Island of Hawaii, and I write for them educational items about this topic. And you can find our blog at Talk Medicine at hawaiianethos.com. And if you send email through that website, I'll get it.
All right.
Stacy, I hope to see you again and talk to you very soon. Thanks again.
Okay, later. Bye.
You can like and follow the Brave New Weed podcast on all the best social media platforms. Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/bravenewweed, or on Twitter at Brave New Weed, or Instagram at Brave New Weed.
So I just want to tell you about next week's episode before we sign off. There aren't many 15-year-old advocates of cannabis who are really challenging their high schools to look at what it is and how it's used. And our next guest is one that I happen to find, one that I found, and one whom I work with, and who I like very much. And she's a very interesting young woman. Speaking of women, so we've been on a roll. We've been on a women roll, actually. We've had women.com liking us. We just talked to Stacy Kerr. Iran, our next guest, is women. So we're on a little women trajectory here.
Well, I think it's great. It's something that is a part of the ongoing dialogue of the Brave New Weed world that we all know is coming, which is everybody wants to see women stepping up. Like you and I both know that white men have been fine in the world of cannabis for a really long time. We get the pass on, if we get caught with something, we get a little bit of leeway on all these sorts of things. Like, we have that privilege to us. So
I think we're starting the Weed 2 movement.
I think we should.
This is
2.0.
We are now saying Weed 2 here on the Brave New Weed.
Hashtag Weed.
Get it? Weed 2.
Oh, no. I don't know how I feel about that,
I
though.
think you just have to embrace it.
Definitely, not to poke fun at the We Too movement because they have a lot of validity, but hashtag Weed 2. I like it.
Signing off. See you next week.
Thanks for listening to the Brave New Weed podcast. This episode and all future episodes are made possible by amazing listeners like yourself. If you like what you've heard, we encourage you to show your support by giving $1 a month for special access and rewards on patreon.com/bravenewweed. You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram via @BraveNewWeed. Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/BraveNewWeed. And remember, you can always find more information about us or information discussed in each episode by pointing your favorite browser to bravenewweed.com.